This video is sponsored by the Ultimate Freelancing Bundle by StudyWebDevelopment.com, which gives you everything you need to start your own freelancing business, including a 130-page in-depth guide, invoicing and client proposal templates, website templates, an SEO checklist, and much more. Visit the link in the description and use the code BRAD25 to get 25% off. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to my Express crash course. So a couple weeks ago I did a 90-minute crash course on Node.js, and this is the next step, seeing that Express is the most popular web framework for Node. And even if you've worked with Express before, I'd still encourage you to watch because you'll most likely learn something new somewhere along the way. So we're going to quickly look at some slides, and then we'll jump in and we'll start to look at how Express works. So let's first talk about what Express is. It's a very fast, unopinionated, and minimalist web framework. Okay, so we all know what fast means. It's very high performance. Unopinionated basically means that it's not a high-level framework such as Laravel for PHP or Django for Python. It's very basic at its core, and it doesn't assume that you're going to build your app or API in any certain way with any certain design pattern. You have absolute full control of how you handle your requests to the server and how you respond, and that's also what makes it minimalist. Now, I'm sure most of you know this, but Express is a server-side or a back-end framework, so it's not comparable to client-side frameworks like React or Angular or Vue. In fact, it's often used in combination with these frameworks to build very powerful full-stack web apps. Many times you'll build out the API with Express so that it takes requests from the front end and then it serves back data, usually in JSON format, and then you can do what you want with it in the front end to render your client side views. Now you can also render views with Express using either just plain HTML, or you can use a template engine like Handlebars or Pug. So there's a lot of different options when it comes to building web apps using Express. So let's look at why we would use Express. Well, for one thing, it makes building Node web apps about 100 times easier. If you watched my Node crash course and you built out the simple web server, there was quite a bit of code there to do something very, very simple. We had to manually grab the URL, load the file, check the content type. It was very tedious. Express makes handling requests very simple, and it's much, much less code. So like I said, Express is used for both APIs that serve JSON data as well as back-end applications that render pages on the server. Okay, like I said, it's extremely fast. It gives you a ton of freedom. It's by far the most popular framework. Some other examples of Node frameworks are Koa, Happy.js, and Adonis, which are all great, but they're nowhere near as popular as Express. Koa and Happy.js are very similar to Express. However, Adonis is much higher level. In my opinion, Adonis is very similar to Laravel for PHP. And it gives you a lot more, but you also don't have as much freedom, and it's a much larger framework. So the next advantage is true for just Node itself, and that's that it's JavaScript. So if you're building a full stack app with like React, you're still using JavaScript on the server side. So there's no need for multiple languages. So that's always an advantage. But that's not just for Express. That's anything that has to do with Node. So as far as what you should know before starting to learn Express, I would say at the very least you should just be comfortable with JavaScript. I'd also suggest having at least some basic knowledge of Node as well as NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. I'm not saying you have to be a Node.js pro, but at least watch a couple tutorials so you understand what it is. Maybe look at some of the core modules that are included and so on. All right, so some other things that can help you out is knowing about HTTP, knowing the status codes. You're dealing with requests, you're going to have to send back responses, so it's helpful to know which type of response you should send back. JSON, if you're dealing with building APIs. High order array methods, arrow functions, promises, all the newer features of JavaScript, they're commonly used with Node as well, so I would suggest getting familiar with that stuff. All right, so let's quickly look at just the basic syntax of a web server. So this is the absolute bare bones to get a server to run in the browser. So basically, we just bring in Express at the top using the common JS module syntax. Node, you can't use the import, the ES 2015 modules with Node by default just yet. If you do want to use it, you'll have to use something like Babel to compile it. Otherwise, you're going to use this syntax. And then to initialize Express, you just set a variable to the Express method here, usually called app, and then you create your endpoints. So in this case, we're accepting a GET request to the index route, which is the slash, and then we just have a callback function that takes in a request and a response, which we'll talk a little bit about in a second. And then we just do whatever we want. In this case, we're just responding with the text of hello world. And of course, we need to listen on a port. So in this case, we're listening on port 5000. So if we went to localhost port 5000 in our browser, we would see hello world, okay? And of course, you can create routes to whatever you want. If you wanted to do slash users or whatever, and you can also include parameters, and we're going to get into all that stuff. So within your route, you can do just about anything. Fetch data from a database. You can use MongoDB is very popular to use with Node, but you can also use Postgres, MySQL. There's third-party packages for just about any database. Okay, you can load pages, you can return JSON data, you have full access to the request and response. Now, the request and response objects are very important. The request object represents the HTTP request properties for things like URL parameters, query strings, any data that's sent within the body, the HTTP headers. All this stuff is included in the request. You can also create something called middleware, which I'll talk about in the next slide, where you can change or add things to this object. And then the response object represents the HTTP response, and it's up to you to use this object to basically send back, JSON data. Do you want to render a template? So you can do multiple things with this response object. If you want to redirect, you can do res.redirect. So we're going to look at more in depth into both of these objects as the course goes on. And then we can parse any incoming data with the body parser that's included with Express. Also, we don't have to put all of our routes in one file. Express has a router so that we can store routes in separate files, and then we can just export them so that we can clean up our application. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about real quick is middleware. This is something that seems to confuse a lot of people. Middleware functions they're just functions that have access to the request and response objects, okay? Just like we do within routes. Express has its own middleware, and so do, third-party packages that you install. We can also write our own middleware functions, which I'll show you how to do. Middleware is capable of executing any code, making changes to the request and response objects, ending the response cycle. Also, you have to call the next middleware in the stack. So when you write a piece of middleware, you'll call a next function. So you can just think of it as kind of a stack of functions that executes whenever a request is made to the server. And you can do different things within those functions. That's the gist of it. All right, so enough talk. Let's jump in. It's much easier to see examples rather than me try to explain it. So we're going to jump in. We're going to look at pretty much all the fundamentals of the Express framework. All right, guys, a couple things before we get started. Obviously, you're going to have Node.js installed on your system. If you don't, just go to nodejs.org and go ahead and download and install it. Now, this is the Express website, expressjs.com, which has pretty good documentation, has some guides. We are using version 4.16.4 in this crash course. However, version 5 is in alpha at the moment. If version 5 is stable by the time you watch this, you should still be all right because most of the syntax, everything that's on the surface, is pretty much the same. So you should be all right even if version 5 is in alpha. Is stable. So I'm going to be using Postman, which is an HTTP client, to make requests to our server. Okay, so Postman can make GET, PUT, POST, delete requests. So I'll be using that. So if you're going to follow along, I would suggest downloading that as well from getpostman.com. Okay, so I'm going to jump into VS Code, which is the text editor I'm using. Of course, you can use any text editor you want. I'll be using the integrated terminal as well, as far as installing packages and stuff like that. So I just have an empty folder called Express Crash Course, And first thing we're going to do is create a package.json. So I'm going to do npm init, and I'm just going to add on the -y flag so that I don't have to answer any questions. Okay, and that you can see that creates a package.json file. Now we're going to want to install Express. There's a couple things that I'm going to install throughout this course, but right now I'm just going to install Express. So I'm going to say npm install or I Express. Okay, so that gets added to our package.json, and now I'm going to create our main entry point file, which I'm going to call index.js. You also might see app.js, server.js. Really doesn't matter what you call it. So here we're just going to start off by creating just a simple Express server. Let me just make this a little smaller. All right, so we're going to first bring in Express. So we're going to create a variable, and we're going to set it to require Express. All right, and then what we want to do is initialize a variable called app with Express. All right, now this app has a bunch of properties and methods, one of which is listen. So that's what we need to use to actually run the web server. We want to listen on a port. Okay, now what I usually do is create a variable, sometimes in a separate config file, but I'm just going to create it here. And we want to set this to a port number. So I want to use 5000 in development. However, we want to also add here process.env, which means that we want to look at the environment variables, and we want to look for one called port. Okay, and then we just want to put OR, so double pipe character is going to be OR. Now the reason we put this is because when we deploy, the server most likely isn't going to run it on 5000. It's going to have the port number in an environment variable, so we want to check that first. Okay, if that's not available, then we want to run on 5000. Okay, so then down here in listen, we just want to put in our port variable, and we can also add a callback as a second parameter. And I just want to do a console log because when we run our server, I want it to let us know in the console that it's running. So I'm going to put in some backticks, and I'm going to say server started on port, and then we'll go ahead and put in our port variable. Okay, so just doing this will actually run a server. So I'm going to save it, and I'll go down here and I'll type in node and then the name of the file, which is index. And you can see server started on port 5000. All right, now if I go to 5000, so localhost, and we want to go to :5000, we're going to get this message here, cannot get slash. So slash is the route for the index page, and it's basically just saying that it can't find a route handler for this slash. Okay, if we try to go to like /about, it'll say cannot get /about because we haven't created any routes, any endpoints. So let's go back in and let's create a route here. So to create a route, we want to use app, and then the type of request that we want to handle. Now, when you just go to a web page, that's a GET request. So we want to do app.get, and then the route is going to be just slash, and then the second parameter is going to be a function. Okay, if you want to use this syntax, you can do that and pass in your request and response. However, I'm going to use an arrow function. So I'm going to get rid of the function keyword, and I'm just going to put an arrow here. All right, now every route we create is we're gonna have access to this request and response object, and we're gonna look into both of these as we move along here. Right now, what I want to do is just take the response object, and it has a method called send that will just send something to the browser, so some text or whatever. So I'm just gonna say hello world. Okay, we could actually put HTML in here. So if I wanted to put in H1, we could do that, and we'll save it. Now, if I go back and I reload, notice that it's not working. And the reason for that is, by default, we have to restart our server. So down here, we'll do Control-C, and then run node index again. And then if we go back, we'll get hello world. Now, it's just the H1. If we look at the source code, oops, I don't want to open that. Let's look at the source here, and you can see it's just an H1. There's no doc type, nothing like that. There's no content type, so this obviously this isn't what we want to do. I'm just showing you this as an example. So let's head back in, and I don't want to have to keep resetting the server every time we make a change. So what I'm going to do is install a package called NodeMon, which will constantly watch our server so we don't have to keep reloading. So I'll Control C to stop, and let's do npm install, and I'm going to add -d because I want to install this as a dev dependency, and then NodeMon. Okay, it's a dev dependency because it's only for development. We're not using it in production. All right, so now we have NodeMon installed. Now to use it, we're going to go into our package.json and we need to create a script. Okay, so we're going to actually create two scripts. One is going to be start, which is just simply going to run node index. So that will most likely be used in deployment. And then for dev, I'm going to create a script called dev, and we're going to use NodeMon index. Okay, and the difference is node index, you'll have to keep resetting the server every time you make a change. NodeMon will constantly watch it. So we'll save this, and then let's go down here and run npm run dev. Okay, so you can see it's running on 5,000, however NodeMon is running. So if I were to go here and let's say add some exclamation marks and save, and go back and reload, you can see that the changes are made. I don't have to reset the server. Okay, so NodeMon is an extremely handy tool. Now, as far as what we send as a response, we have a bunch of different options. Obviously, we have send, but we're not that's not used too much. We could send a file, a single file if we want. I'll show you how to do that. We could send JSON with res.json. We could do res.render. If we had a template engine, we could actually render an HTML template where we could actually put variables in and stuff like that. Some examples of templates are pug, which I really don't like. I don't like the syntax. I usually use handlebars or EJS if I'm rendering templates on the server. Now, what I want to do is bring in the path module, which is just a Node.js module to deal with file paths. And I'm going to just load an HTML file here. So I'm going to say, instead of res send, I'm going to use send file, okay, which will actually send a file. And I'm going to use path.join. We did this in the Node course. And I'm just going to get the current directory with _dir name, go into a folder called public, and load a file called index.html. All right, so we want to create that. So I'll create a folder called public. And let's create a file in there called index.html, and I'm just going to put some boilerplate in here. And let's just do my website. All right. So now if we go back to our browser here and I reload, we get my website. And if we look at the source code, you'll see all of the HTML. So we can load HTML files this way. However, this isn't ideal because we'd have to put a route manually for every single page. If we want an about page, a contact page, all that stuff, we'd have to put separate routes. Now, if you want just a static server that serves just HTML, CSS, images, stuff like that, then Express actually comes with functionality to make a certain folder a static folder, and we want to make this public folder static. So we don't even have to do this. I'm actually gonna just get rid of that for now, and let's go ahead and set a static folder. All right, so the way that we do this is we say app.use. Okay, use is a method that we use when we want to include middleware, and I'm going to show you how to write your own middleware in a little bit and what that is. But right now I'm just going to include express.static, and then we want to point to the folder that we want to set as our static folder. So I'm going to use path.join, and we'll get the current directory and then point to public. Okay, so just that one line right there is setting this public as our static folder. So we can actually now go back and reload and it still works. Now I can put any HTML file I want in here, like let's say about.html. Oops, we want that in public. And then I'm going to just copy the index, paste that in here. Let's go ahead and just change this to about. And now if I go back and I go to /about.html, there it is. So we can just create as many HTML pages as we want. Now we can also create CSS files. So if I want to put a CSS folder and say style.css, we'll just do like body, set it to a dark background, and let's do color white. Oops. Okay, now I'll go to index.html and we can just simply include a link to CSS/style CSS. I'll also put it in the about page. And now if I go back and reload, you'll see that the CSS is in effect. Okay, I can go to /about. Now, I'm sorry, about has to be .html for the static server. Now, if you took the Node crash course, basically this is what we did, and we wrote a whole lot of code to be able to do it. We had to handle the content type ourselves. We had to handle loading the HTML files, loading the CSS, any images, stuff like that. With Express, when we deal with this static folder, we don't have to do anything except just put the files in here and it will just work. And all we have to do is write these few lines of code. Okay, so that's how we can create a static server that just serves, just regular HTML files. It's usually not what you're going to use Express for. For the most part, you're going to build either JSON APIs so that you can connect from a front end like React or something like that, which I'm going to show you how to do, or you want to render templates where you can insert dynamic data so you can create a dynamic app rather than just a static website. All right, so I'm going to leave the static folder there in case we want to use it, but let's go ahead and move on and let's create a route here. So I'm going to say app.get, and let's do /API/members. Okay, so basically I want to create kind of just a simple REST API. We're not going to be dealing with a database. We're just going to have a hard-coded array. But it's the same principle when we're dealing with routes and responses and all that stuff. So let's put in request response. We'll use an arrow function. And what I want to do is return some JSON. So I'm actually going to just hard code right here. Actually, I'll copy and paste it just so I don't have to type it all out. So I'm just going to create an array of members. So basically just users. So we have an ID, a name, an email, and a status. Okay, we have 3 of them. So I want to return this as JSON when we hit this route right here. So we could hit it with React or Vue or Angular. We could hit it with Postman, which is what we're going to do, and we can get these members. So let's go ahead and just do a res.json. Okay, if we want to return JSON, we just do res.json, and we can simply just put in members. Okay, now we don't even have to do like JSON stringify or anything, even though these are JavaScript objects, because this will take care of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and save that, and then I'm going to open up Postman, make sure this is a GET request, and let's say HTTP localhost port 5000/API/members. And there we go. So we get our 3 members. Okay, so it's as simple as that. Now, since this is only one expression here, and we're using an arrow function, I don't even need to use curly braces. We can just go like that. Okay, and I'll just put a comment here that this route gets all members. Okay, now I want to just take a second before we get into creating other routes and talk a little bit about middleware. So as I said, middleware functions, they're just functions that have access to this request and response, and you can actually change things, you can add things, and so on. So what I want to do is just create a simple logging middleware function. So let's see, actually, you know what, let's put these in a separate file just so it doesn't clog this up. So I'm just going to copy or cut those out, create a file called members.js, uppercase M, because it's basically our model, and paste that in, and then we just want to export this. We want to do module.exports, equals members. Okay, and then we can just bring it into our index.js. So we'll say const members equals dot slash, I'm sorry, we want to do require. And let's do dot slash members. Okay, so that should still work. Let's test it out real quick. And it still works. Okay, so as I was saying, I'm going to create just a simple middleware function. So let's go right here and let's say const. I'm going to use an arrow function, but you could use a regular function. I'm going to call this logger. Okay, now when you create middleware, it takes in the request, response, and then next. Okay, and you always want to call next last so that you can move to the next middleware function that's in the stack. Okay, so this, like I said, this is an arrow function, and all I want to do is log something. So for now, I'm just going to say, let's just say hello. Okay, now in order to initialize your middleware, actually I need to do next, like I just said. In order to initialize it, we do app.use, and we're just going to pass in logger. Okay, let's say init middleware. So now if I go and I hit, actually I'm going to go back, I'm going to go to Postman and just make a request and then go back and look in the console and you'll see hello. Okay, so every time we make a request, this middleware is going to run, and we could do absolutely anything in here. We could execute any code we want. We have access to the request and response. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log the URL that's hit and the date. Okay, so we actually have access to certain parts of the URL with the request object. So I'm going to put some backticks in here, and I'm going to say request.protocol. Okay, so this is going to give us HTTP, and then I'm going to do : // and then we want to get the host, which is also available in the request object. So we'll say request. I'm sorry, we need to do request.get host. We can get different parts of the URL. And then we want the what's called the original URL, which is the page. So after that, let's do request.original URL. All right, so let's just see what this gives us. If we save this and then we go back to Postman, send a request, and look in the console, it gives us undefined. That's because I did res. I want request. And yeah, it should work. So let's try that again. Okay, so now we get the whole URL that's hit, 5,000 API members. Now I also want to put the date and time formatted after it. So I'm going to use a third-party package called Moment, which it deals with dates. It deals with date formatting. So I'm going to stop the server real quick and just do an npm install Moment. And then we'll run our server again, and let's bring in Moment. So const moment equals require moment, and then after the URL here, I'm just going to put a : and then I'm going to say moment, which is a function. So we actually have to put this in this syntax, and then we just want to call .format, which is a method. Okay, and that should give us the current date formatted. So I'm going to save that, and I have Prettier installed, so it just kind of formatted this a little bit. And if I go back and we make another request and we go and look in our console, now we have the URL and the date. Okay, so we could go further and we could save this to a file with the FS module if we wanted to. My point is you can do anything you want in terms of middleware, and you have access to these request and response objects. This is not something that's very advanced, but it is doing something. So I'm going to actually put this in a separate file because I want to save pretty much everything I do so you guys have it as a reference. So I'm just going to create a folder called middleware, and let's create a file called logger.js. All right, and then we'll just grab this whole thing here, this whole function, cut that out, and put it into logger.js, and we just want to export. So module dot exports equals logger. Okay, and then we'll bring it into our index.js, const logger, and we want to set that to require, and go into middleware / logger. Okay, and I'll save that, and it should still work. So if I make a request, moment is not defined. So the logger file doesn't have moment included. So I'm going to just cut it from here because we don't need it in here anymore. So we'll just bring it into logger. Okay, so now, oops, I keep opening Chrome. So we'll go ahead, so that works, and then it's still logging down here. Okay, and as many requests as we make, if I just hit this a couple times, it'll keep logging. All right, now I don't actually want this to keep running, so I'm just going to comment out the initializer here so it doesn't actually log anymore. But now you can see how middleware works, how it's implemented. So we're going to move on. Now, the next thing I want to do in terms of our little API that we're creating is I want to get a single member, okay, an individual member. So I'm going to do, let's say, get single member. So we'll say app.get, we want to get request, and we want to go /API /members, and then we need to specify an ID, okay? We want to get the member by their ID, so we're going to say :ID, which is a URL parameter, okay? And we can use the request object to grab whatever's in there. So let's put our callback, request response. All right, now, like I said, we can use this request object to get whatever is in there. So I'm just going to do a quick we'll just do a res.send just so I can show you how this works. So if we say request.params dot, and then we can get any parameter that's passed in here. So we want the ID. Okay, now if I go to Postman, and I'm just going to open up another tab, and let's look at localhost 5000 /API /members / let's say 4. And you can see it gives us 4. Okay, so obviously that's not what we want. We want to get, if we want the member with the ID of 4, which there isn't one, but let's go ahead and get rid of this, and let's just do a res.json. And I mean, there's different ways we could do this. I'm going to use the filter method, which will take an array and just filter things out, filter it out based on a condition. So we'll take the members array, filter. Okay, so it's a method we tack on to it. I'm sure most of you guys have used filter before. And then let's say for each one, we'll call it member. I'm going to use an arrow function, and we'll say we want to return the member.id that's equal to the request.params.id. Now we're going to have an issue here, so let me just show you. If we go to Postman, we know that there is an ID of 1, so let's go ahead and send that. And notice we don't get anything back. So the reason for this is the ID is a number, okay? In our members array, you can see the ID is a number. However, request params ID sends it as a string, so we simply need to wrap this in parse int. And the reason for that is I use triple equals, which means that this type has to also match this type. So let's go ahead and do parse int and wrap that. All right, so now if I go back to Postman and we send that again, we get the ID of 1. Okay, if we do 2, we should get the user with the other member with the ID of 2. Now let's take it a step further, because if we do, like, let's say 6, it gives us nothing back, which may be fine. It all depends. The way you construct your APIs is completely up to you or whoever it's up to. But what I want to do is give a message saying that there is no member with this ID. Okay, and there's a lot of different ways you can do this. I'm going to use the sum method. So I'll create a variable here called found. And this is just JavaScript. Everything that I'm doing in here, aside from this request params ID, is just JavaScript. So let's say members.sum. And same thing, it's a high order array method. We're going to pass in member, and we're going to say member.id equals, and we're doing the same thing we're doing here. We're just checking to see if it exists. Because what sum does is it'll run this condition and give us a true or false based on this right here. Okay, so if it doesn't exist, this will equal false. If it does exist, it'll equal true. And then I'm just going to add an if statement here. So if found, then let's just move this up here. And then we'll say else. So how do we want to handle this if there isn't a member of that ID? Now, this is where HTTP statuses come in. If we just do res.json and everything is fine, you'll see that in Postman it's a 200 status, which means everything's okay. Now, the status I want to give if there isn't a member with that ID is a 400, because that means that it's a bad request. It means they didn't give us the correct request information to give them a correct response. So we're going to do res.status, so we can set the status to something different, and we're going to set it to 400. And then we can just do .json, and we can tack in whatever we want, usually some kind of message. So I'm just going to say message member not found. Okay. Actually, you know what? We could even do this. We could use backticks here. Oops. So we'll use backticks, and we'll say, let's say no member with the ID of, and then we can just put in our request.params.id. So I think that's kind of a cleaner way to handle the response. So now let's try this again. We'll try to get member 6, and we get message no member with the ID of 6, and notice we also are giving a 400 bad request. So let's go back in, and now I want to be able to actually create a member. Now, having all these routes in our index file, it's getting kind of cramped up. Actually, I'm going to close all these up. We don't need these open. So this is getting cramped up. So we can use the router that comes with Express to put all of our similar routes into a single file. So I'm going to create a folder in our root here called routes. And inside routes, I'm going to create a folder called API, just because not all of our routes might not all be APIs where we're serving JSON. We may have routes where we're actually serving server-side templates. So I usually, when I'm building an API, I'll usually create an API folder. And then let's create a file called members.js. And everyone does things different. That's the thing with Express. As I said, it's very unopinionated, so you have full freedom to structure your files and your code however the hell you want. So you're going to see it's going to be different from application to application. So let's take both of these routes, the all members and single member, and let's cut that out, and let's put it in members. All right, now in order to use the Express router, in order for this to work, we need to do a couple things here. So we need to bring in Express so that we can use the router. Okay, so now we can say const router, and we're going to set that to express.router, capital R. Okay, so when we use the router, we actually, when we make our request, or when we handle our requests, we use router dot and then the type instead of app. Okay, so we'll do router.get, router.get. Now we're dealing with the members, so instead of having members in our index, let's cut that out and let's bring it into the members route file. And then the last thing we want to do here is export. So let's say module.exports equals router. All right, now in order for this to actually work, we're going to go into our index.js, and let's go down to the bottom here. We'll go let's go right below the static folder, and we need to do an app.use and then put the route that we want, which is going to be /API/members, so basically like the parent route. And then we want to set a second parameter requiring that file that we just created. Whoops. So it's going to be, let's see, ./routes/API/members. Okay, now since we have the route here, API members, we don't need it here or here. So we just replace it with a slash. Okay, so that'll be slash, and then this one will be /ID. Okay, so now this should work. So we'll go back to Postman. Let's see, members.sum is not a function. That's because members is now in a different location since we moved it. So we need to go // outside of the API folder, and then // outside of the routes folder. Okay, so we'll go back. No ID with 6. Let's try 1. Okay, that works. If we go over here and just do API members, we get all of our members. All right, so we just kind of cleaned everything up a little bit. So now we just have this one line here, and we can just say members API routes. All right, so let's move on and let's create a member. So I'm going to go down here and say create member. Now, whenever you create something on the server, or you're adding to a database, whatever, you want to make a post request in most cases. So to handle a post request, we're going to say router.post instead of router.get. Okay, whether it's a form submission or whether it's getting sent with the fetch API or Axios or something like that. And then in here, we're going to do just slash, okay, because we want to hit the /API/members. Now, even though we're using it right here, we can still use it here because we're using different HTTP types here, so, or methods, I should say. So we have get and post. Okay, so we can use the same route as long as they're different methods. So let's create our arrow function. Now, we want to be able to send data, and when we get that data, it's going to be in the request object. So for now, I'm just going to do a res.send, and I want to send request.body. Okay, now we're going to go to Postman. Let's open up a new tab and make a post request to HTTP 5000 API/members. Now we want to send some data. I want to be able to send the email and the name for the member. So under headers, let's create the content type of application/JSON, because that's the type of data we're sending. And then in the body, we'll go ahead and choose raw, and let's put in some JSON. So we'll send a name of, let's do, I don't know, Jake Smith. And then we'll do an email of jake@gmail. All right, now if I send this, if we look down here, we get nothing back. We get a 200 response, but nothing back. And the reason for that is we need to use a body parser so that we can parse the data that we're sending in the body. Now, you used to have to install a separate body parser. It was a third-party package that you had to install. However, with the newest version of Express, we don't have to do that. There's one included with Express. We just have to initialize it as middleware. So we're going to go back into index.js, and let's say app.use. Let's just put a comment here. Let's say body parser middleware, and we say express.json. Okay, so that will allow us to just handle raw JSON. Now we also want to handle form submissions, so we're also going to do app.use express.url encoded, and we just pass in an object with extended and set that to false. So that way we can handle URL encoded data. So now if I go back and we send this again, you'll see that when we do the res.send for the request body, it gives us the data that we just sent. Okay, so that's coming from this. Now, obviously, we don't want to just send that back. We want to create a new member. So I'm going to create a variable here called new member and set this to be an object. Now, usually when you're dealing with IDs and you're using a database like MongoDB or MySQL or Postgres, it usually creates the ID for you. So we're not using a database, so I'm going to actually install something called UUID, which will generate a random ID for us. So I'm going to just do npm install UUID. And let's just go ahead and run our server again. And then let's bring in that package. So UUID. Okay. Now for the ID, I'm just going to set it to UUID.version4, which is a method, and that will just generate a random universal ID. All right, and then for the name, we want to get that from request.body. Okay, so we want request.body.name. The email we're sending in the body as well. So request.body.email, and then status, I'm just going to set status to active. Okay, so it'll always be set to active when a new member is created. All right, so let's see, we have this object. Now, we want to add this new member onto our array. However, I want to make sure that the name and the email are sent with the request. So let's go ahead and do a quick check here. So we'll say if not new member.name or not new member.email, then let's return, or we can just do res.status. Let's do a 400 because, again, it's a bad request because they should be sending a name and an email. And then we'll say JSON, and let's do message, and we'll say please, we'll just say please include a name and email. All right, and then down here, let's do a members, actually let's do an else. Actually, one thing I'll mention here is if we don't do an else here, we're going to get an error that says headers are already sent. And if that's the case, then you could just do return like that, and that way we don't need an else. So let's just do members.push. Okay, so we're taking the members array, which is just our hard-coded array, and we're pushing on the new member. All right, now that will add it to the array. However, we need to send back a response, and again, it's up to you what you want to respond with. You could respond with the actual, just the new member itself. What I'm going to do is return the entire array of members that includes the new one. So I'll just say res.json, and let's pass in members. Okay, so let's save that, and then let's go back here. Let's try it first without an email. So we'll send that. So we get please include a name and email. And now we'll go ahead and include the email. And send. And we get all of the current members and our new one. Okay, so we have Jake Smith, Jake at Gmail, active, and then this is the ID that UUID generated for us. All right, cool. So the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to update a member. Now, when you're dealing with a real API, obviously you're going to have a database. You're not just going to have a file with your data. And I don't want to get into that because that's something, it's just, I want to stick to Express as much as I can without going into, MongoDB or certain databases. But what will happen is you'll install a package like Mongoose, which is an object relational or object data mapper for MongoDB, and you would connect to your database, and instead of just pushing on like this, you would do something like members. You take your members model and call save like that, and then pass in new member. So some kind of syntax like that, whether you're using MongoDB or you're using like SQLize, which is a great ORM for MySQL and Postgres. All right, so we're just dealing with hard-coded data. So anyways, let's move on. Let's go down here and let's say update member. And I'm just going to copy the whole get single member here because it's going to be similar. We want to check and make sure that there is a member with that ID. Okay, however, it's going to be a put request. When you update something on the server, in most cases, it's going to be a put request. So we're going to check to see if the member exists. If it doesn't, we're going to do the same no member with the ID. However, if it is found, then we want to, first of all, let's create a variable called update member and set that to the request.body. Okay, so we'll get the email and the name from this request.body. And then we basically want to loop through the members we have and then check to see if it matches this ID. If it does, that's the one we want to update. So let's do a for each. Okay, and like I said, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. This is just JavaScript. I mean, I didn't have to do all this, I guess, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of how to create a simple API. So let's do members for each member. We'll put an arrow, and then let's do an if statement here, and we'll check to see if the member.id is equal to parse int request.params.id. If it is, that's the one we want to update, so we'll just set member.name to request.body.name, and then we'll set member.email to request.body.email. All right, now the problem with this is they may update just the name and not the email, or vice versa. So we should probably check to see if the name and email are actually sent. So what we'll do is use a ternary operator. Let's say updated member dot name. Oops, dot name. So if that's included, then let's use that. And I didn't mean to do this request body. I meant to do the updated member name. So let me just get rid of that. All right, so updated member name, else, then we're just going to keep the member name, whatever that is. Okay, we'll do the same thing here. I'm just going to grab this, except we're going to do email. Okay, so just to reiterate, we're going to make a request to API members ID, a put request. We're going to send along a name and email, or either one, anything we want to update, basically. Check if it's found. If it is, we're going to put the request body in this variable. We're going to loop through our members, check to see if the ID is equal to the ID that is passed in here. If it is, we know that's the one we want to update. So then we're going to set the member name depending on if the name was sent with the request. If it was, we'll set it to the new name. If it wasn't, we'll keep the old one. Okay, same thing with the email. Now we need to send back a response. So what I'm going to choose to do here is, let's see, I'm going to just do a res.json, and I'm going to send a message that the member was updated, and I'm also going to send the member itself, okay, which this is the same as doing this. Since these are both the same, we can just do member once. All right, so let's save that. Now let's go back to Postman, and I'm going to copy this URL, open up a new tab, and make a put request to slash, let's do /1. That's the one we'll update. And then we'll add in our content type of JSON. Go to body, and let's change the name. I think, what's the first memo? Let's see, let me just check this. John Doe. So let's change John's email address to, let's say, a Yahoo address. So we'll just do email and set it to john@yahoo.com. And let's send and see what we get back. So we get member updated, and everything is the same except for the email. Okay, so we have just updated the email. The name is the same. Everything else is the same. All right, and obviously this stuff is just in memory. There's no database. It's not getting persisted. But again, the request, the response, all that stuff is going to be the same. It's just this functionality, this stuff here will be different if you're using a database. Okay, so let's see, what do we got left? We can get members, we can get a single member, create, update. So we just have delete left, which should be pretty easy. So I'm going to actually copy the get again. And let's say delete member, and this is going to be a delete request, so we want to do router.delete. Okay, we need the ID because we need to know which one to delete. We'll keep this whole found thing here. And then instead of just returning that, which actually I do want to do, but let's see, instead of doing this, we want to filter out the one with the ID. So we're going to say not equal to. Okay, we're still going to use filter. We'll say not equal to. But let's also put a message. So in this res JSON, what I'll do is say message member deleted, and then, oops, let's put a comma here, and then let's just say member. Actually, let's return, all the members, because that's what this is going to do. It's going to return all the members except the one that was deleted. All right, and then we just want to put our curly brace here. All right, so let's save that. Prettier, fixed it up so you can see it a little better. And now if we go and we make a delete request to this, let's delete the first one, John Doe, and send. We get member deleted, and then if we look at our members array, John Doe is gone. He's not there because we used filter to filter the ID of one out. All right, so we have a CRUD API where we can create, read, update, and delete. So now I want to move on to rendering templates using a template engine. And there's a lot of different template engines that you can use. We're going to go ahead and use Express handlebars. So if we go to the GitHub for that, we need to install this. So install Express handlebars, and basically we can have a views folder, and we can create a main layout to wrap everything, and then we can create individual views and we can render them using res.render. Okay, so this is going to be a lot easier than what we just did with the API and stuff. So let's go ahead and close up our members routes, and inside, actually let's install it first. So I'm going to just stop our server. Let's do an npm install express-handlebars. Okay, we'll go ahead and run our server again. And then in the index.js, I'm going to go ahead and bring this in. Let's go right here. And let's say const exp, so express handlebars HBS. And this is in the documentation, all this stuff. Let's require express handlebars. So it should be dash. All right, now this takes, we have to add some middleware here so that it knows to use handlebars. So let's go right here and just say handlebars middleware. So first thing, we need to set the engine. So app.engine. And let me just show you that this is in the documentation. So I'm just doing this right here. In fact, I can just copy this. So we're setting the engine, the view engine or template engine, to handlebars, and then we're just passing in this exp HBS. And here we're setting the default layout to a file name of main. So when we create our layout, we want to call it main.handlebars. And then here we're just setting the view engine. Okay. So we need these two lines in order to use handlebars. So let's save that, and let's go into our folder structure and create a folder called views. And inside views, we'll create a folder called layouts. And here's where we want to create our main file. So we'll say new file main.handlebars. Okay, now this is a layout that's going to wrap everything. So we want our doc type, our title, all that stuff. We'll just say members app. And let's just grab Bootstrap so that we can make this look decent. Now, let me just explain. For the most part, you're not really going to do this where you have a JSON API and then you also have server rendered templates. It's usually going to be one or the other. You're usually going to either be building an API so that you can have React or Vue or something on the front end and you're just serving JSON, or you're going to have a complete server-side app where you use templates. Since this is a crash course, I'm just trying to show you both, as well as a static server, the static folder that we did earlier. So let's see, let's go to get Bootstrap. And I'm just going to grab the CDN here. And let's go back here and just paste that in. All right, so in the layout, wherever we want to output the rest of our views with handlebars, we want to use triple curly braces, and we want to put in body. Okay, so that's going to output any views. Now, I just want to wrap this in a class of container just to keep it in. And let's put a class of MT4, that's margin top. They're just Bootstrap classes, and we're going to put body inside there. All right, let's save that. So now I want to create a view for the index page. So inside views, not in layouts, but just in views, I'm going to create a file called index.handlebars. And for now, I'm just going to put in H1, and we'll just say members. All right, now if I want to render this, I'll create a route. So let's go right here and say app, because we're not in the router anymore, we're in the main index. So we'll say app.get slash, because I want this to render on the basically like the home page, the index page. And we just need to do res dot render, and we can pass in index because we want to render the index view. We'll just say home page route. All right, so we'll save that, and now if we go back to our application and reload, we get members. Now the reason the static HTML file isn't showing is because we have static down here. If I were to move this above our home page route and save and go back, now it's going to show that. And like I said, in most cases you're not going to have both like this. It's just because it's a crash course, and I want you guys to have it as a reference. So usually you're not going to do something like this. Well, I shouldn't say that. A lot of times you might have a static folder and you might have a form in one of your HTML files that makes a post request, whether it's to add to a database or something, and then, you know, have like app.post/contact or something like that. All right, so let's see. Let's add to our index handlebars file. So we're going to have... actually, I want to show you how we can pass data in. So this render will take in a second parameter of an object, and we can send in whatever we want. So let's say like title, and we'll put let's just put like member app, and then we'll go to index, and let's replace this. Now, to use a variable with handlebars, we just use double curly braces like that, and we'll just say title. So now if we go back, we get members app. All right, I'm just going to center that. So let's do class text center. We'll do margin bottom 3. Okay, now I want to also pass in the members and list them in this template. So what we can do is bring in our members. Remember, they're in this members.js file. So we'll say const members equals, let's do slash members. So now we have access to that array, and I'm going to pass it into the template here. So we'll put a comma, we'll say members, and that's all we need to do, because doing this is the same thing. Now this is an array, so in our template we want to loop through it and then output whatever we want, whether it's just the name or the name and email and so on. So I'm going to put an H4 here, and we're just going to say members, and then let's do a UL, and now I want to loop through the members we passed in. And to do that with handlebars, we do $ each and then members. Okay, and then we end it with slash each. And then in here, I'm going to put an LI, and let's just do the name, so we can say this dot name. Let's also put the email, so I'll do colon, and then we'll do this dot email. And let's just add a bootstrap class, so we'll say list group, and then each list item we'll do list group item. All right, so let's save that. Let's go back and reload, and you can see that it's loading those members. Okay, now last thing I want to do is create a form so that we can actually make a request to our API to add a member from the form. So I'll just put it in the same file. We could create a whole new view for this, a whole new template or whatever, but I'm just going to put it all in here. So up here, let's put a form. Let's give it a class of MB4. It's just going to move everything down. Now the action is going to be /API/members, which we already created. And then we want to make sure that the method of this form is a post. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and add a form group class. And then let's do a label. We'll say this is for name, and input with the class of form control. These are just bootstrap classes. Now it's important to have a name attribute, because that's what's going to get sent in the request body. Just like when we sent JSON from Postman, now we're sending it from a form. Okay, that's why we have the URL encoded. This right here. This will handle the form data. So name is going to be name. All right, now I'm going to copy the form group because we also want the email. So we're going to change that email. Let's change the type to email name. Okay, and then let's put a submit button. So I'll do an input with the type of submit. Value, we'll just say add member. Let's give it a bootstrap class of btn primary, and let's do btn block. All right, so go ahead and save that. And let's reload this page here. Now we have a form. Now, once I send this, it's going to hit the, let's see, routes API members. It's going to hit the post right here. So it'll create a new member. It's going to get this and this from the form. And then down here, it's going to add the member, and then it's going to return JSON, which usually you wouldn't do if you're dealing with templates, but I'll show you that after. So let's go ahead and add, let's say Kevin Smith, kevin@gmail, and send, and you'll see that it returns JSON, and it includes Kevin Smith. Now, usually if you're dealing with templates, you're going to redirect. You're not going to show JSON in an application like this if you're using server rendered views. So what you would do here, I'm just going to comment that out, you would most likely do something like res.redirect and then redirect to slash, same page. All right, so let's go back and then let's do Kevin Smith again and add member. And what happened was it added the member and it redirected us back to slash, which is this page here, and you can see that Kevin got added. Okay, if we add like Matt Johnson, send, and now that's getting added as well. Now I'm going to go and just uncomment the redirect, or comment the redirect and uncomment the JSON, just because I want the API to work. And then I'm just going to put a link in the index page to the API, so to the slash API slash members. So let's do an A tag with the class of BTN, BTN-light. Let's do margin top 4, and we'll say slash API slash members, and let's just say visit API. All right, so that way on this page, we have a button that will go and show us the JSON. All right, so I mean, this is kind of a weird thing to build, but I wanted to show you guys the different things you can do as far as building a JSON API, as well as rendering templates on the server, as well as having a static folder where you can just add HTML files, CSS, and so on. Now, as far as authentication, for the most part, obviously you'll have some kind of database. So let's say you use MongoDB with Mongoose. You're going to create a users model with a login, a register. And if you're building a full stack app, like let's say you have Vue or React on the front end, then you're probably going to deal with JSON web tokens, where you pass a token back and forth to authenticate. If you're using a template engine like we're doing here, you can use Passport.js. In fact, you can use Passport with a full stack as well, because if we look at strategies, there's a bunch of different things, including JWT. Passport local, however, is what you would use if you're just dealing with just Express, just a server-side app. And I do have a whole project using Passport local on YouTube. I do have some stuff with JWT as well on YouTube. The best example that I can give you is my MERNStat course, where we build a React application, we use Express on the back end, and we send JSON web tokens to authenticate, which is it's kind of difficult. It's definitely not something I would get into in this crash course, but just to kind of give you an idea of how authentication works with Express. There's no built-in authentication is basically what I'm trying to say. So hopefully this gave you some insight on at least, making requests, handling responses, handling HTTP status, middleware, templates, stuff like that. So if you made it this long, thank you. I know this was a long video. Most of these crash courses are, but that's it. So I will see you in the next video. Hey guys, one of the best, if not the best resource I can refer you to for starting a freelance business is at studywebdevelopment.com/freelancing. The creator Kyle shared it with me, and I can personally vouch that this bundle is well worth it. You get a 130-page guide to freelancing, and it comes with things like invoice templates, client proposals, HTML and CSS templates, a portfolio website, access to a private Facebook community, and much more. So use the code BRAD25 to get 25% off today.